The woman's vote on the effects of society. Why did males oppose to women getting the vote before 1918? This essay is focused on the woman's vote, which was partly approved in 1918, and later in 1928 it was fully approved. I want to state the reasons and why males disagreed for so long about women getting the vote, and show how women getting the vote has affected society up until today. The timeline of events. So in 1830, this is a timeline of the most important events that occurred during the women's suffrage era, from 1832 until when women were granted the women's vote fully in 1928. Men were always seen as dominant gender. With women getting the vote approved back in 1928, it meant that society started to change, which has affected society today. The issue arose when only males were allowed to vote if they own properties with a value of over £10 in the UK. As of 1884, all males were allowed to vote. Following this, in 1918, women over the age of 30 and were married could vote in the elections. As a result, the fight to get the vote approved for all women, which was later granted for women over the age of 21, when they gained equal rights. So, how did the women get the vote? This slide goes more into depth of just how women managed to get the vote. It began when there was a women's suffrage in the UK. In accordance to the British Library, it started off in 1832 when the first female member got into Parliament, called Mary Smith. There were constant battles and petitions to get the women's vote legalised and approved. Following this, in 1870, the Married Women's Property Act came into play, which allowed only married women to own properties, which meant this was a step in the right direction. In 1897, the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies was built of 17 societies of women to support peaceful protest campaigns and petitions to get women to vote. Later on, in 1918, the Women's Act was later passed in the UK, which, as we've already learned, that only women over the age of 30 or married were allowed to vote. But following this, the Representation of the People Act was approved in 1928, which meant the women had the equal right to vote. So, did the men oppose to women getting the vote? Well, yeah. During the years that women put up the fights to gain equal rights to participate in the voting, like men, it was common that men who were mostly members of Parliament during this time disagreed with the fact that women should be allowed the vote. Shockingly, when doing the research, I found reasons why men opposed women that the vote from the BBC News website, and I personally found that some of the comments showed that males during this period came across quite intimidated by women. For instance, Sir James Grant, the MP for Whitehaven, who said, "We are controlled and worried enough by women," demonstrated this. So, equality for women and how the changes have affected today's society. There have been many changes to society over the years, which have stemmed from the women's suffrage movement. On this slide, there are many ways that state how society is affected by women gaining equality back in 1918. For example, changes to marriage and divorce laws, equal guardianship, and changes to the training for women nurses and midwives. Unfortunately, some things like equal pay still haven't found their way to being legalised yet, which means that a male can be paid more than a woman for doing the same job. The Guardian online offers an article written on how women are still not receiving equal pay from 2018, which is fairly recent. As this article is more relevant, we know that the women are most likely to be petitioning for equal pay now. Also, living in society that we're in today, everyone wants to be seen as an individual and treated the same, and slowly that is happening. The video I've attached briefly outlines the change in society since the end of the women's suffrage since the vote was legalised, and it has been over 100 years.
According to BBC History, the 19th century woman had no place in national politics. They could not stand as candidates for parliament. They were not even allowed to vote. It was assumed that women did not need the vote because their husbands would take responsibility in political matters. A woman's role was seen to be child-rearing and taking care of the home. BBC. In response to this notion, the women's suffrage movement was born. The women's suffrage movement was a period of time where women not only fought for the right to vote, but also for rights which would extend into the home life and into the workplace. This movement was a time of unification, struggle, protest, disappointment, and even violence. For more than 60 years, women attempted to petition, lobby, and rally for their rights. It wasn't until the year 1918 that women gained a limited